Good to see so many people here. If I could get a show of hands, people in the room, people on Zoom, if this is your first meeting for the Lincoln County Dems. Okay. Welcome. Welcome, one and all. We begin our meetings, and I'll start by saying two things. The restroom is over here. There is a step up. Please be careful to step up and then step down when you come out. We have coffee and water in the back. It is not decaf. Apologize for those of you who might want some decaf. And the other thing is, we're going to do a hard stop of no later than 8:30 so everybody can get home to see the debate. And I'll come in tomorrow, Stephen, and help you clean up. We're just going to leave this the way it is right now. We begin all of our meetings with a reading of a land acknowledgement that we wrote in consultation with tribal leadership. And Jeff Bates is going to read that for us tonight.
Thank you, Kelly. The Lincoln County Democratic Committee acknowledges that we are meeting on unceded Wabanaki land. The Wabanaki Nations, the Penobscot Nation, Passamaquoddy Tribe, Fulton Band of Maliseet Indians, and the Mi'kmaq Nation have stewarded the lands and waters of Lincoln County and all of Maine for more than 12,000 years. We acknowledge the cultural and physical genocide of the Wabanaki caused by colonialism and recognize that the impact of that history on tribal citizens persists today. We support ongoing decolonization efforts and affirm that Wabanaki nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination.
Thank you, Jeff. We are very lucky to be joined tonight by Dan Shea. Dan is professor and I believe chair. Is that correct? No longer chair. So this is how you have time to write a book. Professor of government at Colby College. He's written or edited more than 20 books on American politics. His latest one, the one that he is here to talk with us about tonight, and I'm going to have him sign my copy before he leaves. I highly encourage you to read it. It's really very informative. I have not yet finished it, and I did skip to the back first. This book is about the largest survey ever done of rural voters in the United States. 10,000 rural voters from all across the country were surveyed by Dan and by his co-author. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name. Nick Jacobs, thank you, who is an assistant professor of government at Colby College. He's going to talk a little bit, share some slides, a little bit about what he learned. And we're going to listen to this because these are information I think will be really helpful for us. And then we're going to take some questions. So please welcome Dan Shea.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate the invitation. I love that, by the way. I love that land acknowledgement thing. So as a nonpartisan scholar, I shouldn't say this, but I'm awful glad to be a Democrat. So let's keep that quiet. So too late. Glad to be here. A slide can change the slide if you want. I want to give you just a little bit about my background before I jump in. So I am a scholar. I write about parties and elections. That's what I've been doing for a long time. And thinking about elections for a long time since I followed my mother around, who was the Otsego County Party Chair, one of the first women party chairs in upstate New York. I followed her around when I was young. We had a lot of kids in the house. I have 6 siblings. I was the one that just had to jump in the car to go to these sorts of potlucks and dinners. I just kind of loved it. And I was that irritating sort of register to vote Democrat at college and so forth. I became a campaign consultant. I ran campaigns in upstate New York for the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, and then went back to grad school and have done a lot of writing, as Kelly said. I focused for a while on young voters. That was an interest of mine. Why are they so indifferent to politics, and where are they going to be in the next election? Huge for this coming election, right? What's going to happen to the young voters? I've written a bit about civility in politics. one of the first scholars to jump on this in 2010. Remember when all that craziness was happening with the Tea Party and the town hall meetings and all that acrimony regarding the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. So I wrote some stuff on that. I always, a number of books on voting and why it's so important. Next slide, please. But recently, in the past couple of years, I've been thinking a lot about rural voters. What a transition. What a transition. So we'll get to some data in a second, but let's just do a few anecdotes. When I was young, rural areas tended to be more conservative, but not always so. Not always true, right? I can remember, this blows my students away. When I was very young, we took a trip across country in 1972. My dad was an academic. We spent the whole summer camping cross country. Right? This is the beginning of the camping craze, right? And we stopped one day in Mitchell, South Dakota. Went to the Corn Palace, and there was a parade there. And I got to shake George McGovern's hand. He was running for the presidency that year. Arguably one of the most liberal nominees the Democrats have ever had, from South Dakota. There were liberals throughout the West. There were liberals in Montana, right? Indiana, Washington. Think of all, I mean, there were exceptions, many, many exceptions. Just as there were some, believe it or not, some truly red cities. Wasn't long ago when, for example, that Cleveland and Ohio was Democratic, but Cincinnati was deeply red. Ronald Reagan came from Orange County, California, right? So something's happened. We've seen this transformation. It's a transformation from a lot of exceptions and moderation to a deep, hardcore conservative Republican bent. Something very dramatic. Now, a number of people have written about this transformation. You might know, probably the most famous of these is Tom Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas? Really important book. He's a journalist. He wrote about how Kansas went from a populist, sort of labor, democratic state to a hardcore, abortion-fighting, gun-toting, school prayer state. That What's the Matter with Kansas? Carney writes about the decline of social capital in America. The politics of resentment is in Wisconsin. And of course, J.D. Vance, who I think is going to be the nominee. I'm just laying it down. I think the vice presidential nominee. I think he's going to get it. I think Trump's going to announce it tonight. I think he's going to do so bad in the debate that he's going to need somebody like Vance to pick him up. So we'll see. So he writes a book about hillbilly. Here's the problem with a lot of these books. They're anecdotal, they're memoirs, they're often of just one state. So we figured we needed something bigger. So next slide, please. So my colleague, Nick Jacobs at Colby, and I put together two massive data sets. First, we wanted to know whether or not the change we're seeing is actually unprecedented. So we took election data at the county level all the way back to 1824 in every county in the United States. It is a massive, likely the largest aggregate election data set ever created. It was a team of Colby students for 2 summers did this. They got paid well and they got to go to the coast. That was fine. They came down to Denver, Scott here and there. So they were just fine. And also what we did was we did 3 waves of surveys. We talked to 14,000 Americans and we oversampled rural Americans. So we oversampled, we have 10,000 rural Americans. As Kelly said, it's the largest survey of rural Americans ever conducted. And we asked 250 different questions. We got all kinds of stuff. Well, that's why, sorry, Kelly, that's why the book's so long. It's a thick book because we got a lot of stuff to cover. So we think it's a landmark study. So we're going to give you, I'm just giving you a couple highlights so we can get out of here and watch the debate. So slide, please. let's go with the top lines, the big ones. What we say is that rural voters are different. There are some surprise findings. First, rural folks really care about their communities. They're deeply connected to where they live, unlike a lot of other Americans. Now, listen to this one bit of data. So to get at that one data point, we asked probably 5 or 7 different things. Let me give you one data point. We said, if you had the chance to leave, would you do so? And we asked it to everybody. For suburban and rural folks, about 45, upwards of 50% of suburban and rural folks said, if you had the chance to leave, would you? They said yes. It was 20% for rural Americans. 20%. Rural Americans love where they live. And I understand that as a Mount Vernon resident. Yeah. A Mount Vernon resident. And by the way, about 2 weeks ago, an elected official, you didn't mention that, Kelly. I'm now a selectman for Mount. Thank you. I understand that. We really love our rural community. So that's number one. Number two, what we call a shared fate. Rural Americans, also unlike suburban and urban Americans, care deeply about their neighbors, about the well-being of their neighbors. We might have, for example, a rural respondent who's actually doing very well. There are many, hey, surprise, surprise, you all know this to be true. Many rural Americans are financially very well off. Those rural Americans are more likely to be deeply concerned about the well-off of their neighbors not doing so well, more so than we find in other places. Over and over and over, we see data to suggest there is what we call a shared fate phenomena. As my neighbors go, so go I. That's very different. They think their towns have value, right? They're deeply concerned about their towns. One of the things that we write about, for example, is the economic impact of many of these towns. We talk about the China shock, and we talk about NAFTA ghost towns. Boy, if you're going to talk about NAFTA ghost towns and you live in Maine, you know what we're talking about. Know what we're talking about. I teach in Waterville, right? My wife goes to Wilton. She's up at the Mount Blue School. She's in Wilton. I've been to Millinocket a number of times, right? What happens to these towns across the country when the factories end? What happens in Newton, Iowa, when Maytag leaves almost overnight? That's decimating for these towns. They feel like they're looked down upon. I don't have time to do it tonight, but one of the things that we do, we have an old chapter. I don't know if you've read this, Kelly. We have a chapter on the portrayal of rural Americans in popular culture, in television, and in movies. You know, and I got a bone to pick with Stephen King. Think about it. Horror films in the last 2 or 3 decades. Are any horror films located in suburban or urban areas? They're all in rural areas. Think about it, right? Ever since Deliverance, to be honest. Why are there 120 rural reality shows? All right. On and on and on. So they look down upon, and popular culture is part of that. Lo and behold, a lot of rural Americans want to stay rural. They aren't the ones that are left behind and can't get out. We actually had a scholar once say this, you know, they're the ones that want to stay. They're the ones that aren't able to get out. They don't want to get out. Surprise, surprise, rural Americans don't want to get out. Right? So we say that they have a place-based identity. Rural Americans define who they are politically by where they live. That is very different. Now, there is some place-based identity throughout the United States. If you're from South Boston or something, you might have some of that. But rural Americans define political cues based upon their geography. Very different. That's one of the big findings of the book. And they have this shared fate outlook. Slide, please. So a couple questions to go through quickly, and I'll show you a bit of data on this. First, is it all about Donald Trump? Right? Popular idea is, well, yes, because here's the thing. We didn't really think about rural voters in detail until 2016. So now let's just pause for talk about JD Vance for a second. So I am the chair of the department. Actually, in 2016, I was running a public policy center at Colby, the Goldfarb Center. And I had a pool of cash to bring people in to do lectures. And right after the 2016 election, I thought, let's bring in JD Vance. Maybe he can help us understand this tremendous tidal wave of support for Trump in rural America. And I threw every bit of money that we could muster at him, and there's no way he would come because he was in demand across the country, right? And by the way, you do remember he was a never Trumper back in those days. We're all desperate to figure out what happened, but it wasn't really about Donald Trump, and we'll show you some data. No, it's not about Donald Trump. Why don't Democrats get credit for public policy changes? That's often because, and we were talking about this earlier, there's this notion that they vote against their self-interests. In fact, Tom Frank, in his book, What's the Matter with Kansas, he said, look at these people. They don't have health insurance. They don't have dental work. They don't have retirement plans, but they vote for gun control, against gun control policies, about abortion and school prayer and so forth and so on. Well, what we find is there's a set of concerns that extends beyond pocketbook issues that non-rural voters just don't get. We just don't understand what's driving their interests, what's driving their motivations. They're not irrational, they're just different. Finally, we're going to address real quickly whether or not they're a threat to rural America, which springs from a book that's also come out on rural America, White Rural Rage, which we'll talk about. Slide, please. So let's get to this issue of this transformation. So this is a piece of data from our book. And what it does is it tracks rural voting over time. So rural voting is the dark line, and the dotted line is non-rural voting. And it is it is the variation from the mean Democratic vote. The takeaway is, how often does the rural and non-rural deviate? Do they stick together a lot? It's not so much the up and down that matters. It is when they vary. So you'll see it varies a little bit in 1828. That's that one dip down below. That's Al Smith when he runs for the presidency in 1828. But for the most part, it's really tight. This is what I said to you earlier. This is different. This is a new phenomenon, right? But look at the change, and it happened in 1980. We argue, and it's a little controversial in scholarly circles, that it goes back to 1980. But social media didn't emerge until about 2010, right? Obama Netroot campaign in 2008 was such a big deal. You know what they did? Well, they text people. That was 2008. A lot of explanations. Just I'll give you just 3 jumping points. The farm crisis in 1980. If you were in agricultural communities, this was a huge, a devastating phenomenon. You remember Live Aid, Farm Aid concerts and so forth. It was a really bad deal. Iowa alone saw 250 farm foreclosures a month in Iowa alone. Terrible, terrible. By 1994, we have NAFTA, right? So 68,000 factories across America closed because of NAFTA. And they closed in urban areas, suburban areas, and rural America. Our argument is, in rural America, it was particularly devastating because there was often one employer, and the town's identity was linked to that employer. And when that employer left, the town was devastated. This is Millinocket, Maine. This is Millinocket. And then China's admission in WTO in 2001 was another China shock. It's not a surprise that Donald Trump keeps talking about China, 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 and it's not a surprise that he's talking about tariffs. It resonates in rural America because jobs were lost when China was admitted in WTO. So it's 1980 is when we think it happens. And by the way, there was another piece, there was a top-down. We argue in the book that savvy Republicans like Ronald Reagan and Pat Buchanan in particular, and later Sarah Palin, made this argument, a very powerful argument, that Democrats don't care about rural America. That only Republicans understand that rural America is real America, right? This was a concerted effort by Republicans. And my colleague, Nick, if I was here, he would jump in and say, it's also the time, roughly the time when the Democrats began abandoning rural America, right? Nick makes a powerful argument, sort of a side argument, that particularly the last 20 years, Democrats have written off rural America. Slide, please. Okay. And it's not just at the presidential level. We have slides on the House of Representatives, the Senate, and in state legislatures, right? There are a few exceptions to the rule, right, of rural equals deeply red. They are New England, places like Vermont, a little bit of New Hampshire, and a little bit of Maine, right? Little dinky Mount Vernon, Maine, voted for Joe Biden, right? So a little bit. And then other places in the country that are minority majority, like in the South, there are some communities where a majority of the residents are minority. And the other exception is ecotourism towns. Think fly fishing and rafting and things like that. With those three exceptions, a little bit of New England, the tourist towns, and the minority majority, America in rural America is red. And we see that in state legislatures. It's overwhelming. Okay, slide, please. So it's not about Donald Trump. Donald Trump's not running for the state legislature, right? So it's not about Donald Trump. One of the more interesting things that we found, switching to this policy issue, is, we expected to see this radically different perspective between rural and non-rural voters, right? We expected to see this truly divergent pattern. We see some differences, but maybe not as much as you think. So the top figure in each of these, the top bar, is of non-rural. So it combines suburban and urban together. So the top issue for non-rural is the economy, right? Rural is just right next to it, right? Immigration is more important for rural America. Here, take this. More important for rural Americans than for non-rural Americans, but it only jumps up as an important issue for about 20% of them. Really? Only about 20%? Rural America is concerned about the economy. Rural America is concerned about inflation, housing prices, and gas prices. Rural Americans are also suffering, continue to suffer from economic shock, the recession, and from COVID. A lot of data suggests that rural America did not recover from the Great Recession and is still having troubles due to COVID. Next slide, please. This backs up this idea that it's not about policy concerns per se. So what we have here is every dot represents a member of the House of Representatives, right? Along the horizontal dimension is ideology, right? So more conservative is on top and more liberal is on the bottom. The first thing, if I was talking to my students about this, I would say, where have all the moderates gone? There are no moderates here, correct? There's nobody in the center. Right, that's number one. But then the other issue is the rural dimension. So the more right you move, the more rural the district. Okay. Any guesses to what that bottom black dot, Democratic or the more liberal dot is on the far right? Any guesses on who that is? That's Jared Golden. Right? That's Jared Golden. But here's the point. Many of those dots for the Democrats, which is the bottom, that are rural, are actually more liberal than are city Democrats. In other words, they're below the line. So below that bottom line is more liberal. The far right is rural. So anything that's below that line is more liberal than all those to the left that are up above. So don't imagine, a little takeaway today, don't say to yourself, well, the only Democrat that can win in rural America is a truly conservative Democrat, right? A boll weevil kind of thing. Remember the boll weevil term, conservative? That's not true. We don't see that. Sherrod Brown's going to win in Ohio. He's going to win in Ohio. He's going to do well in rural area. And he is no conservative, right? That's Senate candidate from Ohio. So a little more evidence that it's not simply about far right policy positions in rural America. It's something else. Slide, please. But they are at the same time not like other rural voters. Something is going on. It's not about policies per se, but about threats to where they live, to their way of life, to their community. So what we have here is these are Trump voters. Only Trump voters in this slide. Okay. The top bar are non-rural Trump voters, and the bottom is rural Trump voters. You can see the difference. Now we're getting the picture of what's going on in rural America. So the top issue is, will the place that you live suffer if Joe Biden wins? For non-rural Americans, only about 30%, a little less than 30% say yes. For rural Americans, it jumps up to about 45%. They're convinced if Joe Biden wins, where they live will suffer. Okay. Are Democrats a threat to your way of life? We didn't talk about a policy concern. We're talking about a threat to your way of life. It jumps way out for rural America, right? Democrats don't respect my community, way out to the right, right? So here's the thing. It's not about specific policy concerns. It's about this idea that Democrats don't care about rural America. Slide, please. Well, I won't stay because I don't want to run out of time. I want to save a lot for Q&A. I will tell you that we have a lot of data that suggests that rural Americans care about people in their community. I'll give you one that's not up on this slide. It's called economic integration. So listen to this. Did you know that rural America is vastly more economically integrated than non-rural America? And it goes like this. You can drive down any street in Lincoln County and you'll come by rural street, you'll come by a house that is in not great shape. Maybe a trailer, a double wide trailer. And the next house will be $1 million house. And the next house will be middle of the road. The next house will be, another trailer. And the next house will be a beautiful big home. Economic integration. That's really different than what you find in urban America. In urban America, there are beautiful neighborhoods and there are not so beautiful neighborhoods, right? This is part of the shared fate. So the kids go to the same bus stop. The kids from the beautiful home ride on the bus with the kids with the not so beautiful home. And this creates this and many other things, creates this sense that rural communities are in it together, and the Democrats don't get it. Slide, please. A deep distrust in government. I don't want to beat a dead horse. I'm telling you over and over, our data suggests that rural Americans feel like they've been hoodwinked by the federal government, by experts, by the Democrats. The story, I've spent a lot of time lately. In fact, it's not as much in the book as I wish I had. So it's funny, you write the book and then you really start thinking about stuff. The farm crisis. The farm crisis was fascinating, and it happened in the 80s, but a lot of what happened during the Carter administration, the very end of the Carter administration, set that off. You know, and the other thing is, think about NAFTA. So NAFTA, remember, was bipartisan. Do you know that? NAFTA was it was Bill Clinton's thing, but it was bipartisan. But it wasn't long after NAFTA that Republicans started saying, your jobs are lost. And it was Bill Clinton that did it. So again and again and again, Republicans have been able to say that Democrats are the ones that have caused the pain that you're suffering. And it's led to this distrust. Slide, please. Now, but are they a threat to American democracy? So I was just telling Kelly before I jumped up that we've spent a lot of time interviewing and writing and discussing the other books. So 2 books come out about basically the same time, our book and another book called White Rural Rage. And White Rural Rage makes the argument that rural Americans are a threat to democracy. They're racist, they're homophobic, they're xenophobic. This is a really bad group of people that are a threat. They're violent and they want to, they support authoritarians and so forth and so on. And they jump right on Morning Joe. That book is out about less than a week and they're on Morning Joe. Like, Nick and I are like, why didn't we get on Morning Joe? What the heck? So we spent a lot of time debating it. There is the empirical side, and I hate to beat up on other authors, but I will tell you that it's very, very shaky research. They cherry pick data points. They don't do any of their own studies. They simply take data points, often with sample sizes of less than 100, and they make these claims. So we have some data on this. We spend a lot of time thinking about this, and what we find is that rural voters are a bit different, but maybe not a threat to democracy, at least the extent to which this other team of scholars. For example, you might think, well, surely we should declare the U.S. a Christian nation. I just saw, as I was a little bit early, I was looking at the New York Times, maybe you saw it today, the governor of Oklahoma is mandating now that they teach the Bible. Well, surely this from Oklahoma, surely this must spring from all those crazy rural voters in Oklahoma. First off, if you think that rural Americans are more devout than urban Americans, you're wrong. Urban Americans are almost twice as likely to go to services, religious services, than non-rural Americans. Rural Americans pray a little bit more. But when asked about a Christian nation sort of thing, it's barely any difference, right? Look, I wish they didn't believe that immigrants don't work as hard. We've asked a number of questions on race-related issues, and it is higher in rural Americans. They have this misperception, which is higher. But here's the point. It's only 20%. It's only 20% of rural Americans. So yeah, I'm getting the high hope from Kelly. That's fine. I want to answer questions. One more slide, I think. That's it. There's my co-author. Thank you. Brevity is an occupational hazard for academics.
Well, we're also trying to get Dan out of here. He's timed it. If he leaves here no later than 10 till 8, he can be home in time to see the debate himself. Dan, I've had a request come from Zoom that if someone here asks a question that you repeat it before
Okay.
you answer it. So it's time for questions. Who will start in the room? Who's got a question? Okay, hold on. I'm going to bring a microphone to you. This people in Zoom really want to participate, and we've got about close to 30 people on Zoom, I think.
You don't need to repeat it if they're on mic.
Okay.
Similar questions about the data
Yeah.
and how you might have been able to look at it through your study. So what patterns did you find on law enforcement matters?
Yes.
And secondly, about population centers, towns, and those that have lost their population.
Right.
How does that factor in as being something that's concrete
Yeah.
and even more threatening
Yeah.
to a community,
Yep.
especially a rural one?
So on the law enforcement and authority, it is a cultural distinction in rural America that there is great deference and reverence for law authority and for the military. It is a big deal on the military. It's big. We ask it a number of questions. Patriotism, another question. Interesting little question. I pushed my colleague to add this question. When you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, do you put your hand over your heart? You can't believe the rural, non-rural difference on that. How about this question? Very interesting. I love this question. Of course, these are all my questions. Listen to that. There's 3 people ready to get on a plane, boarding a plane. There is a pediatric surgeon, an elementary school teacher, and a soldier. Who would you want to get on first? Yeah, a soldier would win for all groups, but it was through the roof for rural America. Do you know the demographic in rural America most likely to say soldier were women? So to answer the first part of your question, a lot of reverence for law enforcement and for the military and patriotism. Cultural issue, to be sure. To be sure. You're not going to have a Republican county committee meeting that doesn't open with the Pledge of Allegiance. It's not going to have that. Right. And then it'll finish with Greenwood's, what is it? God bless you. So that'll be part of it too. With regard to the other piece, absolutely. One of the biggest issues, because rural doesn't mean agriculture, doesn't mean farms. Right? It often means these small towns. And after World War II, many of these small towns had factories, had community centers, I'm sure Rockland's got to be part of that, right? And what happens is this decimated, so jobs leave, the manufacturing jobs leave America, but the difference in rural America is the town's identity is linked. So we interviewed this guy from Newton, Iowa, who said when Maytag was there, everybody in that town would bleed Maytag blue. And then it leaves, the town is gone. The community is gone.
Do we have any questions from anybody on Zoom? We've got a couple more here in the room, but I want to give the folks on Zoom a chance. Autumn, is there any questions I don't see any hands raised, but are there any questions in the chat that you can read out? I'm not at my computer, so.
No, just somebody did want to know about the survey when that was taken.
Yeah, we did one wave. We did it in 3 different waves. This was in the fall of 2020, so before the election, and then like December after the election, and then March after Biden had taken office. So it was right around the election and the transition to Joe Biden.
And the data that you captured on the political voting from the 1800s, what was that again? That was
That we just went
by
to
county?
We went to counties, and county by county. Often we had to go to the Secretary of States. We had to pay for the Xeroxing and blah, blah, blah. Yep. We had to go state by state all the way back to 1824.
1824. Okay. I saw a hand raised over here. Here we go. I'm coming to you.
As a morning Joe aficionado,
Yeah.
why one of the things that frustrates me greatly is the fact that I think that the Republicans have a much better marketing on rural America
Yeah.
than the Democrats. And I'm just wondering what your feelings are on that. And I wait for why can't they market their achievements specifically to rural America in some areas where they can make rural America feel that they're part of the whole thing
Yep.
rather than feel isolated.
So we wrote a response to this book in a number of places, but I guess the one I'm thinking of is in Politico. So we wrote a response in I guess it was Politico or the Wall Street Journal. We did some stuff in Wall Street Journal, the Politico one. And what we did was we went through their points data by data. And there were 3,000 comments after that online. Probably 2,800 of them said screw rural voters. The hell with rural voters. They are all racist and they are crazy. We went data by data, right? So it was easy. Of course, this book went on the bestseller list. Why? Because it sold an easy stereotype. It sold what we call a cognitive cue, right? Yes, they're rural, they're racist. Yes, they're violent. Well, where's the data, right? And the problem for Democrats is, why the hell would you invest in rural America if they're all crazy lunatics? Why would you recruit good candidates? Or why would you spend any time? Why would you write a check to the Lincoln County Republicans? It's just a rural bastion in Maine. I'm sorry, not Republican, Democrats, sorry. Why do that? So you're right, it is a PR problem, and groups like this have to understand that rural Americans are different, they're conservative, but in our view, they're not off the wall, right? They have concerns that need to be listened to. We may not agree with them in the end on their policy choices, but they're not lunatics that should be written off, at least in what Nick and I believe.
So I've got one comment and a question.
Sure.
The comment is, I'd like to point out that the majority of the IRA funding from the Biden administration is going to largely conservative, mostly rural states.
Yep.
So that may have an impact
Yep.
on, well, we hope that that will have an impact. The question has to do with youth. So you've written previously about young people. You talked about it a little bit. I'm really worried about the young generation and what's going on with young men.
Oh,
And I wonder if if you found in your data any differences that are tangible between young men in rural versus non-rural districts.
do you know Gigi George? She wrote that book Down East. You know about this book? A wonderful book about a group of young women in Down East Maine, about the pride of where they live and so forth. Great book. We had her at Colby, and I pulled her aside and I said, what about the young men in these communities? And she was like, it is a big issue. Something's happening in America with young men. You're right about that. I can tell you, just as an aside, at a Colby honors convocation where students come up and get awards, from every department, I don't know if it's 80% they're women, 85, 79. Something is happening in America. So it's a great question. We have just a little bit of data on that, like voting preferences and so forth. They're much more conservative than non-rural young voters, but not as conservative as their parents.
We are
I-
out of time. Oh, is there one question? We can take one short question. Is there a question on Zoom, Autumn?
Yeah, I think it's the crux of why we've asked Dan to be with us, is somebody really just wants to know, are there any approaches that would help Democrats appeal to the rural voters, particularly here in Maine?
So the problem is questions can be short. It's the answers that are the problem. So here, we don't offer prescriptions per se. But at the end of the book, as Kelly probably knows, because she skipped all the way, we do talk about, we make this case, and it's a nonpartisan case, that we need two-party competition everywhere in America. That's what we argue. It's an argument for Democrats to show up, because without two-party competition, the system goes to hell. Democracy goes to hell without two-party competition. So a couple things that we say is, first, let rural Democrats be rural Democrats. Let them be different. We say authenticity truly matters. The examples that we point to at the end of the book, like Jared Golden, he's a Mainer through and through. I think he's going to win. Lincoln County divided.
No, we're CD1.
Okay. So
We got Shelley.
yeah, you get Shelley easy peasy, but he's different. But he's a Democratic voter, right? And he's going to vote for Hakeem Jeffries if he's different. Authenticity. Also allow the sort of a tip that we met with the Senate Democrats. Nick and I met with Chuck Schumer and Cory Booker and all those people just recently. And one of the suggestions that we offered them was try to allow rural communities to move forward with federal funding in the ways that they see fit, sort of decentralize the control of resources to from federal monies. Let rural communities do their thing.
Which is pretty much what Maine has done, I believe. We have legislators in the room who can verify that, but I believe that that is exactly what we've done. Dan, thank you so very much. We have a lot of other questions, but thank you. Thanks, everybody. And I want to, speaking of rural voters, I want to recognize that Lincoln County is one of the most rural counties in the state. When I've said this before, people are looking at me with a puzzled look on the because you don't think it is, but it's according to how the census defines rural. But we have here candidates who are excellent at talking to rural voters. We've got one standing in the back right there, Cameron. We have Allison Hepler, who isn't our legislator anymore, but she's here with us in the room. We've got Holly Stover. Lydia isn't here yet. Wayne's not here, but these are all people who they have the conversations that Dan was talking about need to happen. So it's good to know that we are doing, you're not giving advice, but if you were, we're doing what you would tell us if you were giving advice. So I have a few campaign updates, and then I'm going to turn things over to our new campaign manager, who I'll introduce in 1 second. I wanted to make sure everyone knew about the results of the June 11th primary. And we also had a recount in Senate District 24. And I understand that the winner of that is on the Zoom. Denise Tepler, are you here? Oh, I see you waving in the car. Okay. Oh, nope. Off. Thank you. Congratulations, Denise. We're looking forward to knocking doors for you. Okay. The other thing, and we will have Denise at a meeting. We're going to do this in July. We're going to have all of our candidates come in, and we're giving them the mic, and they're going to answer every question you've got. I haven't told the candidates this yet, but be warned. So the other thing we did, and this is where you all showed up. If you remember, our judge of probate, because of a technicality, was not able to qualify for the ballot in March and needed to get at least 300 write-in votes in Lincoln County to qualify to be on the ballot as a Democrat in November. You all gave him 917. Thank you. So that was awesome. We have 2 updates on 2 of our House districts. House District 45, that's my district. That's Waldoboro and Bremen in Lincoln County, and it's Washington and Friendship in Knox County. The Democratic candidate we have, Jim Eaton, has unfortunately had to withdraw due to some health reasons. So we are in the process. As soon as we get notification from the governor, we're going to be doing what's called a nominating caucus. And we're also going to be doing that in House District 53, which includes Dresden in Lincoln County, and in Kennebec County, that includes Pittston, Randolph, and Chelsea. I want that seat. That's Michael Lemelin. I want that seat. I want him gone. It is a mission. But we're going to be doing what's called nominating caucuses. It's kind of complicated, but it's actually fairly simple to put together. I'm not going to bore all of you with those details. If you live in Waldoboro, Bremen, or Dresden, hit me up after this meeting. I'm happy to let you know what's going on. And we're going to be getting in touch with the local Democratic committee chairs in those districts in the next couple of days. So we'll be working on that soon. Now, on to introduce. We have just hired a fabulous campaign manager who started, we hired him on a Thursday night. He started on a Friday morning. God love him. Stephen Wicks, please. Welcome, Stephen.
So this is the update from the campaign office, which you're all sitting in. We opened, I guess officially last Saturday. We had the open house. Some of you may have been here. Who wasn't here? Just a few. Okay, well, it's good to see. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay. So, right. So the office is now open. We're open all weekdays. On Monday and Tuesday right now, we're sort of 9 to 5. And Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in the afternoon. We will be expanding to regular work hours all through the week and adding hours on Saturday when we get our volunteer office staff team up and running. Okay, so that's being organized now. The office still has a few rough edges. As you can see, there's no hot water in the bathroom yet, but we're getting a new hot water heater probably early next week. So we'll smooth off those rough edges and make this a welcoming, inclusive, and supportive place for you guys to come in, just chat with other fellow Democrats, find ways to help out. Okay. In terms of volunteering, we've already got roughly 40 folks signed up as volunteers. Yeah, it's a great start. And but we're looking to get well in excess of 100 as we run through the end of the summer, so that we have a good, strong army to do door knocking and drive our candidates around, write postcards, paint signs. We're getting a lot of demand for yard signs and for large format signs. So there's things that we have in the works which we think are quite interesting. One of the new additions to the campaign this year is we're going to try to start what's called relational networking. We're going to try to get folks who are core Democrats and our strongest supporters to talk to their friends about why this election is important to them, to have conversations with their neighbors and with their friends, and let that and encourage those folks that they speak to, that if they come to feel strongly about this election, which many of them will, right? Because this is a really crazy election that we're going to have, that those folks will then go do the same thing, and that these waves will propagate throughout the county and get folks thinking about why it's really important to get out and vote in November. Our website, which many of you are familiar with, received a major overhaul today. And there's now a campaign section. So it's the LincolnCountyDemocrats.com. Yes. Thank you to Autumn. There's a lot of work. And the /Victory 2024. So that is the new campaign page. We'll be updating the content frequently through the summer. And finally, I want to make a plug for the Clean Elections Fund for our candidates. I was at a Bristol Dems meeting a couple of days ago, and Lydia was there, and I didn't know this, but every $5 that a new voter provides to a candidate, well, for a House candidate, that translates to about $109 in state funding to run the campaign. So that's a 22 times multiplier on a small $5 donation. And she asked me to remind everyone that as a household, you can give multiple $5 donations if there are multiple registered voters in your household. So tiny amount of money goes a long way for our candidates. Okay. I also want to mention that the two county commissioner candidates that we have in the district, Evan Gutkowski and Dave Levesque, as county candidates, don't qualify for that pot of clean election funding. And so they rely entirely on straight up dollar-to-dollar donations from us just to defray the costs of running. And that's all I have. Well, I will. Yeah. Are we going right into that? Okay. All right. So, all right. We'll start in the House. So, I want to welcome Brian Colleran. He's the House Democratic Campaign Committee. What's your title? Deputy Caucus Director from the. So you're the fella who's going to be working with our House candidates, right? So you have some things to say about them. So I'd like to invite you up to give us an update on what's going on and how we can help.
Thank you. Yeah. This is my double duty tonight. I was just in the parking lot, Zooming with the Androscoggin County Democrats. So thank you for that. And this morning I was down in Waterboro with our amazing candidate that is running down that way. She's actually the librarian of the Kenny Bunk Free Library. And she has 2 little kids. And the only reason I'm telling you all of this right now to back it up is because she couldn't go out to campaign tonight because she needed to have someone watch her kids. She needed to go and have someone cook dinner. And there's so many other things that we talk about with volunteering that there's just a lot more that people can do. Who here was at the Democratic Convention this year? Yes. And who, I think Elaine Marcus, who won a wonderful award, talked about volunteerism and how important it is, and that, you know, drivers, canvassing, writing postcards is just the start. Those are the obvious things that we can help out with. But so many candidates like Cameron, Holly, Allison, and everybody else that's running for office just need so much more. This election, you know, it's such a stereotype, is probably the most important election. 2 years ago, we won a 83 to 68 majority in the state house. Sounds like a lot of numbers, but that's only 8 seats. And if you add up the margin of victory for those 8 seats, that's only 909 votes combined. If that was a US Senate election or running for president, that would be in recount. That's what's at stake. This year, our House Democrats have done such amazing things. We've went and passed expanded background checks. We've passed amazing healthcare coverage for women. We've made incredible historic investments in housing and for homelessness. We've even passed national popular vote. That's been a thing for like 20 years. So we need to do everything we can to go and keep the majority. And we have 2 amazing incumbents that are returning, Holly Stover and Lydia Crafts, and we feel great about them. Yeah. Both of which are chairs. And also another member in the room, Allison Hepler, is the chair of another committee. So we have powerful, strong, wonderful women leaders here in Lincoln County and in the Mid-Coast. And award-winning. Yeah, yeah. And we have an opportunity to pick up a couple more seats in this way. HD 47, who here is from Wiscasset, Jefferson, Ulna, or Whitefield? There we go. 1 and strong, but we have an incredible opportunity to pick that up with Wayne Farron, who couldn't be here tonight because he had to go and work at the Jefferson General Store, which is such an incredible thing to have the heartbeat built back into that town. And so we're really lucky to have him running. Yeah, yeah. And then over in Waldoboro, we're going to have an amazing candidate. Kelly is going to make sure, because that is her race, and she's going to make sure. I live in Alna, so I'm going to make sure we have a great candidate over there. So you have 2 great people that actually really care about this, not just personally, but, you know, politically as well. And, you know, we're going to have an amazing candidate running in the Dresden, Pittston, Chelsea, and Randolph seat. So, and there'll be more to come on that. So as we think about volunteering this year, know that there's a lot more than you could do. You know, the campaigns are all going to need some help. They all have, you know, Holly, Cameron, Allison, Lydia, they've all done this before. And they have a good core group of folks, and they could always use more. But there's a lot more things that we can go and do. So just wanted to go and give a shout out to that. So thank you all for being here. I actually finally, after how many years I've lived in Lincoln County, finally did my paperwork to go and fill it in today. So we're going to go and keep the house. So thanks, everybody.
Okay, next, could we get Jess up on the screen, please? If she's on Zoom, I believe. So I want now to introduce the Senate a Democratic Campaign Committee counterpart to Brian. Jess, could you tell us your title, please?
Yeah, so I'm the regional field director. I work with this county and a couple other counties nearby. Just moved up here from Arizona about mid-March, and I'm having a really good time getting to know everyone in the county, getting to know each county's specific concerns and the volunteers. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. I work with Cameron Rennie directly, helping her campaign. And so I hope that we can see all of you guys in the office and at some volunteer events.
Thank you so much, Jess. One of the things that Brian was talking about, how important it is and how it's slim majority in the House. This was something those of you who were at the convention heard from our Attorney General, Aaron Frey, and you also heard it from our Secretary of State. You also heard it from our State Treasurer. Those three positions are not elected by the Maine voters, they're elected by the legislature. So whoever controls the legislature is going to decide who manages our elections, who manages our state treasury fund, and who manages the legal world for the Attorney General. So that's why these races are so incredibly important. We have a few items of committee business. The first is we need to approve the May meeting minutes, which Carol Preston, our secretary, sent out to everyone, I believe earlier this week. Do I have a motion to accept those minutes? Thank you. And I have a second. I do. Are there any questions about the minutes from May? Seeing none here or online, all those in favor? Excellent. Okay, now we are going to, John, are you online on the Zoom?
Yes.
Okay, good. Jan, would you want to
She-
talk about your
she
interest
was.
in getting volunteers for the voter registration info table?
Unmute myself. I'm going to unmute myself. Thank you all. I wanted to let you know, first of all, that as part of the outreach lead, one of our primary responsibilities, especially in campaign season, is to make sure that we are providing tables, also known as tabling, in locations across Lincoln County to inform potential voters of the ways that they can register to vote and what the process is. So our really kickoff event happened at the Pride Parade this past Saturday, where we had a table and we had some Bristol Democrats manning that table, which was terrific. We appreciate that. And I think the one point that I wanted to make is that I had the opportunity to have the microphone, and I made the point that we are happy to have everyone participate and be a voter in Lincoln County, but we are specifically interested and hoping for more of a presence with our young voters. So what I noticed in that Pride gathering, those of you who were there might be able to comment as well, was that there were a lot of young people there. So I guess as a focus group, young people are very difficult to reach, and I felt it gratifying that we were able to engage with them in this environment. So that's that point. The other thing I wanted to make sure that you knew is that at our recent Bristol Dems meeting, we brainstormed about different locations within Lincoln County that might be available for us to do some tabling. And when I say tabling, I mean we populate the table with information about voter registration. We can take the cards if people choose to fill them out and deliver those to the town hall. We physically do not do voter registration. We cannot do that, but we can facilitate it. So this is really voter registration information that we're providing. I was looking for some input into those locations that are out beyond the Damariscotta, Newcastle, maybe Bristol area. And one recommendation was the Jefferson Market. I'm still looking for some locations in perhaps Alna, Dresden, and Somerville. If the Johnsons are here, maybe you could give me some suggestions. But if you have those suggestions, you can send me an email at janjohn1us@yahoo, or send a note to Kelly at the chair, and she can forward that to me, because we're going to want to ramp that stuff up pretty quickly. Any questions? Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you, Jan. Next, we have a treasurer's report from our treasurer, Mary Devlin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Devlin, and this May, so remember, I always give the report for the previous month. And in May, we have started now ramping up our campaign expenses. So the first time we actually did spend more than we brought in, although we do have a positive expense variance report for the year. We have a balance of $55,000 as of the end of May, and I can see Jeff, for those of you on Zoom who can't see him, is going like, because he's going to come up next and talk about the couple of great fundraisers that we have coming up to make sure. The reason we did have a negative balance in May is that we, in fact, have paid for this site through November. So instead of doing a monthly expense, we have paid for it and can now make sure we're here through the election. Any questions?
Thank you, Mary. Next, we have some updates for fundraising. Jeff?
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Kelly. We are gearing up for, is this on? Yeah, okay. We're gearing up for our lobster bake for this year, the annual Family Fun Day Lobster Bake. That will be held Sunday, August 4th, and it will be at the Cider Hill Farm, as it has been now for the last 5 or 6 years. We'll gather under the big tent. Should be a lot of fun. Autumn Mahoney provided the name of a wonderful group that we're going to be hearing from, No Spring Chickens. It's a pair of a duo of women, Linda Pacheri and Michelle Tanguay, and I'm really looking forward to having them perform at the lobster bake. We'll have lobster, we'll have mussels for those who are vegans. We'll have vegan burgers, and we also have hot dogs if you're not interested in lobster, or maybe if you're allergic, as I know some folks are. There's plenty of information about the bake on our website. Autumn has, as always, presented a wonderful visual graphics for the event. There are photographs from last year's event if you're interested in seeing what it's like. It's a family fun day afternoon, lots of great food, fellowship, and old-fashioned politicking. So I hope you put it on your calendar, Sunday, August 4th, and we look forward to seeing you then. Well, it's a beautiful venue. It's out on a farm. There's a big tent, usually a great breeze. People have an opportunity to reacquaint themselves with folks. Folks from Jefferson get to see people from Westport Island, and people from Waldoboro get to see people from Southport. And, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. And Bill Mesmer, if you're out there, it's Sunday, August 4th. Valerie, do you want to talk about
August 4th happens to be my birthday. So if there's a birthday cake at the lobster bake, I'd be all right with that.
Okay, we can manage a birthday cake for Kelly. Absolutely.
So yes, we once again have the North Haven raffle ticket for a beautiful evening ride out on the boat. A fantastic meal. Yes, 5-course meal. Drinks, beer and wine that's made over there. It's very elegant. Jeff has been. Ina has been there, yes. So a lot of people have done this. We've done it for 6 years, 7 years. Wow. Yes. So tickets are $30 a piece. And it benefits us. And if you're the winner, it's so worth it. It's elegant. It's beautiful. The view is fantastic and great conversation for the whole meal. Oh, it's healthy food too. Okay.
And you get to support the Lincoln County Democratic Committee.
Yes, you do. And this headquarters. Yes. So who's up next?
People are going to be shocked because I think we're actually going to be finished early. That doesn't happen for the Lincoln County Dems. Next up, we have an opportunity for any of our local committee leaders who are on the Zoom or here in the room to share any announcements they have. And I want to give a shout out to the Bristol Dems and to the Waldoboro Dems because in this week alone, they each have had their meetings. They both had more than 20 people show up to these meetings. I think there were about 25 at each one. These are people who are now committed to knocking doors for our candidates and helping to elect them. So I just want to shout, and I know that we have another shout out, the Booth Bay Region Dems just yesterday participated in the Windjammer Parade, had an outstanding float. It was a sailboat and it said all aboard for democracy. It was fabulous. The Wiscasset Dems for next Thursday for July 4th have a big parade. I'm going to be in that one carrying our banner. So hope you can all come out for that. And I saw that we had on the Zoom, I believe Ben Stickney, who's the co-chair. We have Rebecca Waddell here in the room from Waldoboro. I know Jan, who's the chair, is on the call. I don't think Lucian is here with us tonight. We have Mary Devlin in the back with the Damerscott Dems. Do any of you have any other announcements that you want to make? Any upcoming events you want to talk about? Yes. Here's Holly Stover.
Thank you. If you haven't received an email from me or from the party, I'm having a fundraiser in Booth Bay Harbor on July 10th from 5 to 7 at the beautiful Booth Bay Harbor Inn. You cannot get closer to the ocean or you'll be in it. I hope you'll all come. Please come. And it's 5 to 7 on July 10th. Have you seen it? How many people have actually seen it on? Okay. We'll get more of it out.
Yeah, get that to us and we will share that out with our membership. Are there any other community announcements or anything for the good of the group? If not, we move to my favorite part, which is where we get to vote in new members, one of whom is sitting right there. Brian Colleran from Alna, Sally Bush from South Bristol, Ruben Mahar from Waldoboro, Michael Elliott from Bremen, Gary and Judy, and I apologize if I misspelled this, mispronounced this name, Getchell, Dresden, is Getchell? Oh, right there, hello, welcome, okay. Kathy Neely from Booth Bay Harbor, Holly Moyles, I believe, from Waldoboro, and Richard Wall from Bristol. Do I have a nomination to accept these individuals as members pending their verification? Okay, I didn't even get my sentence finished. Do I have a second? Okay, all those in favor? Welcome to our new members. Anyway, thank you all very much. Do I have a motion to adjourn? And seconded? Excellent. Good night. We will see you soon. And stop by the office to sign up to volunteer.